Lesson 32. We continue reading from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2. Sutra 3. The lack of awareness of reality, the sense of egoism or I-amness, attractions and repulsions towards objects, and the strong desire for life are the great afflictions or causes of all miseries in life. Patanjali is doing something very interesting here. He reduces all misery in life to only 5 issues. The lack of awareness of reality, which is ignorance. The sense of egoism or I-amness, we simply call egoism. Attractions is attachment. Repulsion is hatred or anger. And the last one is strong desire for life, which is fear. Fear is the last station. And if you look around, you will see that most people live in some form of fear, including ourselves. And it is the final stage of the process that starts with ignorance. You can see this process if you look back at how your life evolved since you were a child. When you are born, you're pure. You're not conditioned with fear, yet you're not aware of yourself yet, still full of vital and sparkling energy. By the time you're an adult, and especially after graduation, you have reached the stage of the 5th Klesha. You can see in your own life and in people around you that young people, they know no fear unless they have been indoctrinated and conditioned to fear. Young people are full of hope, dreams, excitement, and that continues until graduation, the final graduation. And parents let you, generally, be free. And society let you be free and young. We do a lot of foolish things, of course, stupid things, but we're not obstructed by fear yet. But what happens as soon as you graduate is that society, the government, and parents often, they tell you to become serious. They will use other words, but what it comes down to is get a job, start a career. Buy a house, start a family, and start planning for your future, your retirement. From that moment on, we start to worry. We start to worry about our job, we start to worry about our mortgage, we start to worry about our relationship and relationships, etc. It's a natural evolution that is taking place that makes people end up in the final stage. And basically all the decisions that we make as adults are based on fear. Every psychologist and psychiatrist can tell you this. Now, if you have read the handout, you see that a very strange twist is occurring. It starts with a story about a sergeant in the army. What is that all about? That is how we need to deal with fear. There are movies, classical movies even, where you see the same process occurring. A school bus, the yellow buses that you have in the United States, full of recruits, young men generally, mostly, is being delivered to an army camp, an army base, to be trained to become professional soldiers. So all these brawny boys come out of the bus, each with a different identity, different clothes, different haircut, sometimes a big mouth, full of youthful brawn, cockiness. And there is the bully sergeant, whose job it is to make professional warriors out of those young, cocky men. They're young, they know no fear, but they also do not know what war is about. So they are very cocky, they're very brawny, and they think they can conquer the world. The sergeant, being a veteran in war, knows that that is not going to win wars, because the biggest obstacle they have to deal with is fear. When you are in war, when you're on the battlefield, grenades explode. Left and right comrades are dying. There is fire, there is chaos, there is noise. Normal people would panic, instinctively run away. You can't win wars, you can't win battles with soldiers that run away. So what does the bully sergeant do? He reverses the Kleshas, basically. He helps recruits deal with their fear, so that when the bombs start exploding, when the comrades left and right start dying, that you don't run away. And he does that, how? By humiliating the recruits. He doesn't do that out of masochism, out of a pleasure to hurt. On the contrary, he does that because he knows that anger overcomes fear. Just look back on your life and remember something that you were scared to do the very first time that you did it. And then somebody came along, maybe a parent or a friend, who makes you feel silly or stupid or ridiculous because you don't dare to do that thing. Now what happens internally is being made to feel stupid or silly or ridiculous makes you boil inside. It makes you angry. And what do? You put your foot down and you say, just wait and see, I'm going to show you something. And just like snow melting before the sun, your fear melts away and you do what you didn't dare to do, fueled by anger, which is the klesha that comes before fear. So technically what you are doing, what the bully sergeant is doing, when the recruits are being subjected to very hard training and going through the obstacle course, doing very difficult and sometimes risky and deadly exercises if not done correctly, when the recruits freeze because they can't overcome their fear, he comes and he doesn't stimulate them with understanding and sweet words and trying to encourage them, because that doesn't work. He knows that doesn't work. He humiliates them. He tries to piss them off on purpose, to make them put their foot down and say, I'm gonna show you something, just you wait and see. Teaching them to overcome their fear, not by running away from the danger, but with determination, using anger. No, I'm not going to let this happen. I must get through this. That is why this story of the bully sergeant is here. We have to become a little bit a bully sergeant of our own. When confronted with fear, we need to tell ourselves, hey, wait a minute. Is not, there is no danger here. Just be real, just be realistic. And sometimes you need to put your foot down and say, what? I'm going to show you something. Just wait a minute. It is that attitude that helps you do things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do, that other people might not be able to do. It is a quality that can be very helpful to achieve things in life that otherwise would be out of reach. Somewhere in the story you will find an anecdote about a couple that on a vacation they went hiking, and there was a piece of the trail was clambering on the side of a piece of rock where a rope was installed and people had to clamber alongside the rock, and it's kind of a scary adventure. And one of the people didn't dare to, couldn't overcome their fear. But while people were already getting to the other side, she couldn't overcome her fear. She didn't dare to do it. And her husband said, well, if you don't dare to do this, you might as well stay home knitting socks, something in that vein. And as a result, she started fuming, angry at her husband, but also angry at herself for not being able to overcome. And within no time, she was on the other side. She clambered along the rope, and she was on the other side. Anger overcomes fear. That is what the bully sergeant is about. Try to recognize that most people live in fear, and that practically everything they do, or most of the time don't do, decide not to do, is simply because of fear. And it is fear that denies us to evolve, to grow, and to do things that we want to do, but simply cannot do. Because instinctive, subconsciously, it is fear that is paralyzing us, keeping us from doing it. And the issue here is, of course, that this is subconscious, so we can't help it. And the purpose of this discussion is that you recognize what is going on next time when frozen by fear, and that you take control of the process, which is only possible the moment that you become aware of what is going on, how you feel, and how that is making you act or causing you not to act. You can also see this process in relationships. If you've been in a love relationship starts in a wonderful way with a sense of being in heaven. If love is mutual and it is genuine, it starts with both people being on a very high level of energy, being in good spirits, literally, because all your energy is here. Pure love is radiating from you. Does a relationship stay like that? No. Why? Because there is a ladder going down, taking you to fear. The first step in that process is out of ignorance, so not being aware of what is happening. You're simply in love, in a pink cloud, and you just undergo that. The next step then is that you become aware of yourself. Ego kicks in. Then comes attachment. People who are in a relationship become attached to their partner. You become attached in such a way that it brings your energy down. The pink cloud in the crown chakra, the wonderful unconditional love that you experience in the first stage comes crashing down, literally. You fall out of paradise. Ego, attachment, and then comes the suspicion, the distrust. You want to check your lover's phone to know who they are communicating with. Check their email. You want to know where they went and who they met. And all kinds of friction occurs that has nothing to do with love anymore. That kind of ruins the wonderful way that the relationship started. Now, if you look at it, all relationships follow that pattern. And we don't learn until we do something like yoga and are being presented with how this technically works. That is why we talked about unconditional love before. My partner tells me I'm going to meet a friend. The normal next question is, who are you going to meet and where? And who is this person? And I say, okay, enjoy yourself. I don't need to know who she's going to meet and where she's going to meet. Because wanting to know that is out of fear. It might be a threat to me or to our relationship. No, there is no reason for that. Because if your partner is up to no good and has inappropriate relationships with other people, sooner or later it will manifest anyway. So I just let my partner go and I fully trust my partner. That is not easy, but the alternative is that you show fear, which manifests as suspicion, lack of trust, and from there you can only go down further and the relationship is poisoned. So it takes courage, but the result is wonderful. It's freedom, not only for your partner, but also for yourself. And surrender, trusting in the universe or God, that it just is the way that it's supposed to be. You understand that you avoid a lot of suffering and because a lot of relationships end up in misery because of this, because of lack of trust, suspicion. And it's human, so there is no judgment here, but just technically dissecting how this works. It comes from Muladhara Chakra, which is a deeply rooted instinct of survival. And if we don't control that, we sometimes even end up killing what we love. There are so many examples of violence that sometimes end in death that are a result of this very process that I'm describing here. It's extreme, but it's based upon insecurity. It's based upon lack of trust, suspicion. And it is not that our partner did something wrong. They didn't. It's within ourselves. That insecurity and that lack of trust is within ourselves. And it is triggered in Muladhara Chakra. So there's no rebuke here, there's no judgment here. Just try to understand how it works. And that will give you a handle to control it next time when you're dealing with something like that. And if your partner is up to no good, it doesn't matter how you deal with that, with suspicion or with trust. Because it will manifest sooner or later anyway, and that relationship will not last. And there's no need to be sad about that, because it means that you can evolve to a higher level of relationship towards into the future. Relationships breaking up are always painful. That is because of attachment. Attachment and ego. And no matter how much yoga you have done all your life, breaking up hurts. But if you understand how it works, you still have to go through the pain, but you also become very efficient in remaining constructive and simply dealing with the whole issue, dealing with your fear and your pain and your heartbreak, and moving forward. So considerably reducing the disruption that otherwise would take place. But a relationship, a love relationship ending, or a loved one dying because of old age or disease or an accident, there is no yoga or therapy or spirituality that can help you to avoid that. Because you're human. But what you can do is deal with it in a constructive way. Take control of the process. Make sense? Now, what you do with this philosophy, you have 5 kleshas. In life, we simply descend, starting with ignorance, subconscious life. We all start out like that. Leading to egoism, leading to attachment, leading to hatred or anger, and ending up living life based mostly on fear. As a result of yoga practice, developing consciousness, insight, you develop a tool with which to deal with this process. You reverse the process, starting with anger to help you come out of fear. And you go to the next step, sympathy. You show to yourself, I'm only human. Everybody makes mistakes. There is no need to beat myself up over this. You show appreciation for the way that you're dealing with the whole thing, ego. And so you reverse it step by step. And you end up not in ignorance, but in wisdom. We all start out ignorant. Experience in life, if we go through the experiences consciously, and that is the key word here, consciousness, allow us to become wise. So ignorance turns into wisdom. Do you understand how this works? Now, yoga presents this as a static process. We start out ignorant since we are born. We descend out of ignorance subconsciously into a state of fear where we base all our decisions and actions on some form of fear, doubt, worry. And most people stay stuck there. Yoga proposes that you can, if you take control, reverse that process. And because you do it consciously, ignorance turns into wisdom, and it seems like it is a one-time process. The reality is that this happens again and again. I remember very clearly when I was in the beginning stages of my yoga practice and started to develop insight. And every time I had an epiphany, I felt so euphoric and had a feeling that, you know, all my problems are now solved. I have insight. Only to realize that that insight is limited to one issue. Realizing further down the road that out of ignorance again, I had descended down the line into fear. And in the beginning, it took sometimes months to discover that I got stuck again and needed to reverse that. But practice makes perfect, and going through that process repetitively, repeatedly, makes you more and more skillful at recognizing that you are doing it again. So life is a process of discovery, really. And instead of looking at it negatively, you look at it positively, because you become wiser and wiser as a result of this. You descend into fear, paralysis in the extreme case by fear. You take control, you reverse it, develop insight as a result of this conscious process. But then you realize that with some other element of life, it can just happen again. And as a result of experience, practice makes perfect, they say. You become more and more skillful at detecting that you're going down that slope again, allowing you to interfere faster than before, reducing tremendously the amount of suffering that you have to go through before you realize that you need to take action. That is what this is about, reducing suffering through consciousness, through replacing ignorance with wisdom. So it's a dynamic process. It's difficult to describe. When you read about it or the way that I talk about it, it seems like a static process. I'm trying to go out of my way to explain that it is a lot more than that. But it is, practice is the best teacher in life. Going through that yourself consciously is the best teacher in life. Sutra 4. Avidya, ignorance, is the source of those that are mentioned after it, whether they are in the dormant, attenuated, alternating, or expanded condition. This sutra tells us that ignorance is the cause of the 4 kleshas that follow after it. Egoism, attachment, anger, hatred, frustration with yourself and the situation you find yourself in, and eventually, at last, the paralyzing fear that we find ourselves in is all caused by the first klesha, avidya, or ignorance. Whether they are in the dormant, attenuated, alternating, or expanded condition, that is about how events manifest in life. Dormant is when something is not really manifesting yet. The seed is there. The presence of there is the presence of a possible conflict, but it hasn't been triggered yet. It hasn't been manifesting yet. That is what dormant here means. You have here the 4 stages of manifestation of events in life. In the dormant state, the seed is there, but people don't recognize it yet. We don't recognize something is going to happen. A wise person, a person with lots of experience, already senses the potential for something to happen in that first stage, the dormant stage. That is the ultimate level of control of your karma. The attenuated stage is where the seed starts to manifest, but it's still rather a very small event. Then you have the alternating stage. Things start to blow up, start to manifest, start to move, cause disruption. That is the 3rd stage, and the last stage is the expanded condition, where you find yourself in the middle of it. Now, most people recognize a situation or an event when it's too late. In the 4th stage, in the expanded condition, or maybe in the alternating condition, the alternating stage, the 3rd stage, but too late. It's already causing disruption and damage. You go through this process consciously from now on. You will eventually develop the alertness, the skill to recognize an event, a disruption, a possible brewing conflict, while it's still in the dormant stage. And when you develop that alertness to recognize that, it gives you the power to prevent it from going to the next stage. Make sense? When you understand that ignorance is the cause of all misery, it allows you not only to understand yourself better and take control, but very importantly, it allows you also to understand perpetrators, people who do wrong to you and trigger something nasty in you. You see, in the explanation, something about Jesus, what he said when he was nailed to the cross. He appealed to the Father to forgive those stupid soldiers for nailing him to the cross. That is, he understood that they did not know what they were doing. Out of ignorance, they just nailed a living being to a cross based on assumptions and prejudice and what have you. Or maybe just even worse, just because they were following orders from their superiors. Instead of being angry at them, he realized their ignorance at that moment. In the beginning, when I came to Korea, I took the subway frequently. I was a freelancer going around town, and I didn't have a car yet, so took the subway a lot. Subways are very busy in Seoul, as you know, and especially during rush hour, there are no seats available. So I still remember very vividly, I was aiming for a free seat, and just before I arrived to sit down, I was violently pushed out of the way with an elbow. And what that does with you is it makes you blow up in anger. It does with me. But I'm a yogi, so I undergo this process consciously. I feel the anger, but then I look at the person who is doing this, and I see an old lady. And then I start to contemplate, just naturally, and I see where she's coming from. This old lady was a young lady during the Korean War, 50-53. The country was devastated. There were no trees on the mountains anymore. Everything was chopped up, either for firewood or for food. Firewood or food. So the United Nations came in with their ships and their trucks with sugar, flour, rice, cooking oil to hand out to the people. So those trucks spread out over the country to the villages, and just imagine what happens. The truck stops in the village, opens the rear gate, and they start handing out the food stuff. But there's never enough. And it was the women bearing the brunt of the famine, of the war. They were standing in line to get a bag of rice, some sugar, cooking oil. They had to take care of their family. And there never was enough. So what do? You use your elbows. And the strongest gets what they need. The rudest get what they need. That is what I saw. And that realization did not allow me to be angry anymore, because I understood where she was coming from, literally. You understand this? If you can do this, put yourself in the other person's shoes, it will save you so much agony, so much misery. Not easy. You're only human. The first is the anger, the rage. But you step in and you say, hey, what's going on here? Because it's a typical Korean thing. So there must be some. Why are people from that generation behaving like that? There is a reason for that. When you understand the reason, you just can't be angry anymore. Doesn't mean that you invite everybody to treat you like that, but at least you understand it's not personal, it's not deliberate, it's just a condition. It's a samskara. Going back to what we learned in the first session, samskara, a dormant memory. For that lady, 30 years later, seeing something that she wants triggers that reaction, that same reaction that occurred when she was waiting in line behind the United Nations food delivery truck. It just, out of ignorance, because if she were not ignorant, she would control that trigger. She just sees something that she wants and she uses her elbows like she did 30 years ago to get her hands on some food so she can feed her family. Once you understand that, you can't be angry anymore. That doesn't make it right, but that's not your problem. Your problem is to take care of yourself. And if you can avoid anger or other toxic emotions by insight, wisdom, then you benefit from that a lot. And that lady will have her own karma to deal with. But you understand, so you show your heart, your understanding. But she now has a characteristic that goes back 30 years ago. Not everybody she comes across will be as understanding as you are. That's her karma. So you see there the process of the Kleshas at work. Samskara is that conditioning brought upon her by famine. Seeing something that she needs, which at that moment happened in the subway, but it can happen in the supermarket, it can happen in the street, it can happen in family situations, friend situations. She behaves in a nasty way, people will react to that. For us, this means, if this happens to us, we investigate, figure out what causes it, so we can avoid it. But this lady, and it maybe even opens your heart even more, this lady is suffering this again and again in her life out of ignorance. She will not understand, like most people will not understand why people act and react nasty to her, not realizing that it is her samskara that is being triggered when she sees something that she wants or needs, and that then manifests into elbowing people, getting her hands on something in violent ways, and then people reacting upon that. You understand that? You take care of yourself, other people don't, and they will confront her. That's her karma, and that's not your responsibility, unless you get involved and become personal. You understand that? That is also where pratyahara comes in. Detachment. You feel that person's misery, understands where it's coming from, you want to help, but in most cases you can't. You just have to surrender, accept it as it is. And to prevent yourself from suffering other people's misery, you simply have to accept it as it is. Accept it as that person having to deal with their own burden and their own karma.
Now I understand, but I see a little bit of complexity.
Yes.
Because I'm wondering if you want to get rid of, or you want to overcome the ignorance, maybe you have the chance to ask or seek for answers directly. I'm not so sure that only under our assumptions and perceptions and answers we can really overcome ignorance. So just going back to an example like that, like somebody that pushes you in a subway. Indeed, all of that introspection and all of those thoughts might be right, but maybe the lady was just tired and she wanted to catch the seat. These are things that we don't know, so I'm just wondering if seeking for an answer is better or not engaging in all of those situations, or just looking for answers myself is gonna really overcome ignorance and give me more wisdom. I don't know. So I'm seeing more options besides only.
Yes. Try out all the options that you see and see where it leads. And if it leads to misery, you have to make a small adjustment there.
Okay.
That is what life is about, experimenting. And that's how you develop insights. But also understand that I am reflecting my experience and my insight. Your experience and your insight might be very different. But it gives you an idea of how you can deal with situations. And in the process prevent your misery. Sutra 5. Avidya is taking the non-eternal for the eternal, the impure for the pure, evil for good, and non-Atman for Atman respectively. So, again, Patanjali is reducing a very complex issue to 5 elements, 4 elements actually, saying that ignorance is taking the non-eternal for the eternal. This is very interesting. Ignorance is taking the non-eternal for eternal. When you are born, you're ignorant. Everybody is born in ignorance. Try to remember when you started to become a little bit aware of your surroundings and the people. And what I see is, I see my mom and my dad. And I think they have always been mom and dad. Then you see your grandmom and your granddad. And you think that is grandmom and granddad. And they've always been like that, and they always will be like that. You have an aunt, you have an uncle. Now suddenly, your aunt calls your mom by her name. And you, as a little, still ignorant creature, you scratch your head and you say, "What did she just say?" And you say to your aunt, "Hey aunt, that is not Monique, that is mom." And your aunt says, "Sweet boy or sweet girl, your mom is my sister." And now you become dizzy because you had no idea. And then your dad says to your granddad, "Hey dad." And you scratch your head and you say, "Dad, that is granddad." And your dad says to you, "Yeah, but granddad, I am your dad, but granddad is my dad." And you get dizzy again. So you discover the world and you realize that things evolve. And it will eventually lead you to realize that you will grow up. One day you will be a dad or a mom or a granddad or a grandma even. Taking the non-eternal for eternal is also the way that we take things for granted. We live in a world, especially the developed world, where everything is subject to organization. Everything is organized. As a result of that, all our needs are met. We need water. We don't have to go with a bucket to the river to get water. We turn open the tap in our house. And that water doesn't have to be filtered or boiled to desanitize it, to sanitize it. It's clean. All that work has already been done. And even better, you need hot water, you turn on the hot water tap, and you have hot water coming out of the wall. You're hungry, you take your wallet, you walk to the closest supermarket or convenience store, you have food. You need electricity, you plug in, and it's there. What most people don't realize is the enormous organization behind it. If there is the slightest disruption in such a developed society, you turn on the tap and there is no water anymore. You can't flush the toilet anymore. There is no light anymore, no heat anymore. It's disastrous. We are born with the comforts as we know them, not realizing how easy it is for all this to be disrupted. That is also taking the non-eternal for eternal, taking things for granted, not realizing that it could just easily fall apart, get lost. There are many examples. The neighborhood that you grow up in, you think it's always been there, it always will be there. But I can tell, I've been in Korea for 25 years. I've lived in several neighborhoods in Amsterdam, and most of them have been torn down and rebuilt. It's not there anymore, everything that I knew and was familiar. You'd never expect that. Real estate, they call it real estate, which implies that it's immobile. In French you call it immobilier or something like that. It's immobile, it's something that will last, but it doesn't. Okay, taking the impure for the pure. We are all guilty of this. When we find excuses for behavior that deep in our heart we know is actually not correct or proper. But if we're not in ignorance, in our ignorance, we allow this little voice in our head, the little voice of our subconscious functioning, to tell us story, to whisper stories in our ears, that it's okay, something that is actually not okay. Smokers do that. I have smoked, my dad smoked. My dad was always joking about his terrible cough. Any sane person knows where that is going to end. And it did end, of course, with lung cancer. Taking the impure for pure is we talked about purity, saucha, before. Finding excuses to justify the inexcusable. Politicians do it all the time. Watch the news. I love watching the news just to observe how our people are functioning. And the people that the country relies on the most, politicians, are in fact the biggest impure people. That you are confronted with. And not only that, they have no shame to function like that. And the reason for that is there are many people that don't see the impurity and they give them votes. That is why there is so much fake news. People who want votes appeal to the ignorant part of the population with lies. And as you have seen, they often win. Take Trump as an example. Any sane person, any person with the least bit of insight, common sense, knows that he is a fountain of lies. And yet, 50% of a whole population of hundreds of millions of people believes him. It is, of course, his responsibility not to do that. But he is very deliberately doing that just because of the gain out of self-interest. And that applies to the next one too. Taking the evil for good. When in the 1930s Hitler started to rise as a skillful orator, a skillful, he was very skillful at manipulating people. Maybe like Trump. I don't want to compare the two, but he knew how to rile people up. He knew how to appeal to people's raw emotions. It led to a horrible war and mass murder of innocent people. That is, people didn't see the evil that they were admiring until it was too late. And if you are aware of how this works, and if you see what happened with what Trump did, you can see that the seed is there for a disaster to happen. With hundreds of millions of people following this person who's only out for his own self-interest, leading to, it led to the insurrection, where they entered the capital and were out for blood. And that could have escalated further and further. That could have gone out of hand and led to a civil war or even worse. Ignorance is widely spread and it leads to these kind of issues. The last one is taking non-Atman for Atman. That's a little bit more complicated. But remember, Atman is the self with a capital S. Atman is the true characteristics that are located in your crown chakra that in most people do not manifest. How do people manifest? People manifest based upon how they are conditioned, based on culture, education, all the things that you identify with, that you have absorbed since birth. Spiritual people have two births. Normal people have just one birth. That is the birth in the beginning of their life. The second birth occurs when you do something like yoga that leads to an awakening of consciousness, and that then leads to connecting with, or what we call making soul consciousness. Soul consciousness is the becoming aware of your true characteristics. And when that happens, you realize that it is not related in any way to everything that has been familiar, to everything that you have been taught by parents and education and media also. You develop your own self with a capital S, but you also develop your own truth, your own opinion, your own insights. Many people will say, and that is what this is about, taking the non-Atman for Atman. Many people will say, well, this is who I am, and that is how I think. not realizing that what they are reflecting is how they are conditioned to think, not what deep in their heart they really feel about the issue. It's a little bit complicated, this, but it's something that we become aware of with time and experience. Questions? Yes?
It's not really that's the last subject that we've been talking about, but the opposite happens a lot as well, doesn't it? Like unless maybe because I think she mentioned something similar regarding the vibration that we give out and how can we explain that maybe when something really extreme happens to someone, then that would have been a direct correlation to their personal negative vibration that they gave out. So kind of to be, again, kind of devil's advocate, if something kind of improper and unexcusable happens to someone regardless of where in their life, we can see that oftentimes the reaction of that person is to stay in that victim state.
Yeah.
And repeat. One second, I just forgot what I was saying. But it was, yes, to themselves, have those excuses and explain, in their own head, why something evil happened, because it's such a shock to have been the victim of it, not to have been the perpetrator of it. Right?
Yeah.
So then that's when it gets complicated, because anger isn't often sometimes that we let ourselves feel towards someone else. And that's something I wanted to allude to the first, second, before fourth and fifth, Sutra 5 and 4 and 5, where we talk about opening our heart and maybe being in someone else's shoe and understanding that it's oftentimes not personal, and everybody has their own data and they may not react the same way because they don't have the same conditioning and wounds. But therefore, again, the opposite can also be true, where I guess I get confused as, or maybe it's experience only is going to help me find the balance between not being too open and always trying to find the reason behind somebody else's actions, and then where the limit where it puts me in misery rather than liberates me from anger because I understand them.
Yes, but understanding the perpetrator does not absolve them.
Exactly.
So you have to clearly understand that for yourself.
Yeah.
But understanding that it happened out of ignorance allows you to move on with your life. If you keep blaming the perpetrator, and if you stay angry, which is normal and very natural, yeah? Because something went horribly wrong there if they did something very wrong. You have every right to be so angry. But this is about taking care of ourselves. And people who are traumatized, if they are not able to move beyond that, they end up in a box where they can't get out anymore. That means that 40 years later, something that happened 40 years ago is still making you miserable, is still blocking you from developing, from evolving, from being happy, from having normal relationships. So you're doing this for yourself, not for the other person. It seems like as if you must embrace the person that did wrong to you. That is not what this is about. It's about trying to understand that what they did out of ignorance. And if you can see where that behavior comes from, because of their own trauma, you can move on without poisoning your own heart. So this is about taking care of and reducing your misery.
Yeah, I was trying to express the opposite of, let's say, for years you're able to see where the person comes from, or even no matter how random the situation is, understand that it's from ignorance, and therefore it would be taking it a step further, like instead of understanding that it's from ignorance, so I move on, for example, the way you expressed it in more detail, and then instead of that, you can carry it with you, because let's say it repeats, and then is it possible that you become angry a lot later because what you do is actually put yourself in misery?
Put yourself?
You put yourself in misery.
You put yourself in what?
In misery.
In misery.
Yeah.
Well,
because I don't know how to explain this. There's a meddling basically, and I guess I think it's something that I can understand. I will understand now the root experience, because it's more natural for me to see somebody else's ignorance,
yeah.
than to see my own blaming of myself, like other people. So I guess that becomes complex where it becomes kind of the opposite. I understand what you express, but when it's the opposite, I feel like it's more difficult to talk about. So I think it's going to be an experience kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, look, Patanjali presents us very complex issues that you cannot put in words easily. So when you read a book like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, you really have to meditate on what you read, or reflect on what you read. And every person who reads that book will develop their own insights based on that, and they're all equally valid, depending on your personal experiences that lead you to those insights. But the danger with this is that it might sound simple, and it is not. What you're learning here gives insight, I know that, but it takes a lifetime to process. I know that too. So it is that complicated. Because a human being is complicated. We think we are very sophisticated, and in a sense we are, but one does not exclude the other. Ignorant, subconscious functioning is something that everybody has a tendency to, and the problem with that is you don't know it because it is subconscious. Developing contemplative powers leads to a process that allows you to realize your ignorance. And in the beginning, when you start realizing things, like I said before, you're elated, you're euphoric, because you realize that you are discovering things that you've never known before, and it's amazing. And it comes in moments of quiet. You don't have to read big books, thick books, or have complicated discussions with a psychiatrist or so. No, it's just something that comes to you in a moment of light. And in the beginning, that experience is in my process. In the beginning, it gave me a kind of cockiness, like I know it all. But that didn't last long, because I realized it was a process. I may have realized a small part of me, of life, but there is so much more to discover. There is so much still that I'm ignorant of. And it has caused a lot of suffering along the way, but I dealt with it as much as I could in the way that I'm trying to convey, by undergoing it consciously, trying to understand it, and then doing something, learning something from it. And that is also why I say it takes a lifetime. And it made me realize that we live in a world where we have the luxury, we can do so many things by choice. But the essence of life, what life really is about, is this. My realization. All the rest is just, superficial or distracting. All right, let's have a short break.